The state of Texas has recently unveiled plans to construct a new military base to defend against what they are calling an invasion. However, this military outpost is being called a FOB, a forward operating base. Now, typically when you hear about FOBs in the context of the US military, it's usually overseas in combat operations. However, Texas is taking their invasion and the defense of the border into a totally new direction, where the National Guard will officially have a headquarters or a hub where National Guard members will officially be able to take control of the border once again. So stick with me in this video because we're going to go over the new strategy for the Texas National Guard and the creation of this FOB, and we will also compare FOBs overseas and how Texas looks like they are using the game plans or blueprints of what the US military does in today's military strategies overseas. Now, first things first, a FOB. What exactly is it? Well, a FOB is a forward operating base where soldiers can organize, mission plan, and it's usually going to be your central hub where soldiers can then disperse and go and do their missions. Now, typically in the context of overseas combat operations, a FOB will actually go from a FOB down to a COP, known as a combat outpost, and the FOB will always support the COP. Now, what's interesting about this is that Texas is essentially doing the same thing. When the press conference came out from Governor Abbott, the main purpose of this FOB, once again, was to serve the purpose of soldiers being able to be housed, have a nice dining facility, but from there, soldiers will then be able to go to their own outposts or different sectors of the border where soldiers can do their missions. You guys have to remember the US military has been doing this for a very long time. The creation of FOBs, the creation of COPs, and understanding logistics supply chains. And one thing that Texas was extremely lacking in was actually having a centralized hub known as a FOB where soldiers can all gather together, mission plan, and go and do their mission. Now, one thing that's interesting about FOBs is that they are typically shaped and designed around their physical environments and what their mission is going to be. Some FOBs can hold up to 5,000 soldiers, some FOBs can hold up to 30 soldiers, but the FOB in Texas is actually rather large, and it goes to show what direction Texas is going in to utilize their National Guard. Now, this is straight from the Texas government website. The Texas Military Department acquired 80 acres of land in Eagle Pass to construct a forward operating base that will house up to 1,800 Texas National Guard soldiers, with the ability to accommodate an additional 500, who are deployed to respond to the open border crisis created by the Biden administration. The base camp will also feature a 700-seat dining facility, a recreation center, laundry facilities, Wi-Fi access, individual rooms for soldiers starting at 118 square feet, chaplaincy programs, and medical and psychological health facilities. So as you can see, the state of Texas is investing in a forward operating base that's going to be rather important and crucial to the mission of the United States and really Texas in trying to deter away migrants. Now, there are some other things I should point out that the state of Texas wants to include with this FOB. In the coming weeks, we will also be expanding operations north and south of Eagle Pass, putting up additional barriers to fortify our border. We are also adding 3 more fan boats and expanding our drone program radar truck capabilities. Under Governor Abbott's leadership, we are developing every available resource and strategy to protect and defend Texas. Now, with Texas openly admitting that more operations are going to happen to the north and south of Eagle Pass, and they're going to add more fan boats on the Rio Grande, again, it goes to show that this forward operating base is going to be fully functioning, and it's truly going to be the backbone on how the National Guard will officially be operating in the capacity of like a border guard, or at least trying to detain away illegal migrants. Now, something else I want to point out that's rather unique about this specific FOB that no one's really talking about is that when you look into FOBs in the context of overseas operations, again, I had mentioned that FOBs will typically go from a FOB to a COP, a combat outpost. Now, this FOB in particular, when it comes to Texas, they have just plopped it right on the border between Mexico and Texas. Now, this is not typically how FOBs operate this close to the border, but nonetheless, it's not like we are necessarily at war, and this is a very specific operation that Texas finds themselves in. And another thing I need to point out is that Eagle Pass happens to be the area or the epicenter of where most migrants try to come into the country through Texas. And again, Texas has found a way to bypass federal laws, saying the situation they are in is an invasion. And because of this, they don't really have to wait or worry about the federal government. Texas can defend themselves and bypass federal agents and create their own military base, a FOB. And by plopping it right where all of the migrants are coming, again, Texas has found a way to fully take control of a situation where the National Guard was not really able to do their job. You may have noticed when explaining this FOB that there's going to be proper bedding, there's going to be dining facilities, there's going to be all of these accommodations. This is because prior to the announcement of this FOB, some Texas National Guard soldiers were quite literally sleeping in Holiday Inns and then would show up to their outpost. And some Texas National Guard soldiers were just sleeping in random campsites and then would show up to where they need to be. But now again, having a centralized, organized hub known as a FOB, a forward operating base, it goes to show Texas will now be utilizing their National Guard almost in the capacity of a COP, a combat outpost. But again, this is going to be more detaining operations and not combat operations. Now, when it comes to FOBs in the United States that are being used as like actual military operations to either deter or defend the nation, there's really only a handful of them in the United States, where some of them are publicly documented and some of them you really don't know what they're up to. You could only assume they're performing border operations. And I'll show you what I mean. This is one example of a FOB that is in the public light, but it's being used as a training facility.
FOB Sentinel serves as our tactical SIGINT exercise. It's a simulated austere environment that replicates what these soldiers could be facing in combat. This is for our 35 Novembers, our 35 Papas, and our 35 Sierras. And the rigorous environment here takes what they've learned in the institutional classroom and they put it into a field training exercise.
Now, FOB Sentinel is not what the FOB in Texas is going to be. The FOB in Texas is going to literally be a forward operating base right on the front lines of the Texas invasion. FOB Sentinel, as you saw, is a training facility which the majority of FOBs, which it is a handful in the United States, are being used. And I want to show you the difference between other FOBs, like in the United States, that we don't really hear about. Now, I actually had to really dig through the internet to find some legitimate FOBs sort of being used in the same capacity as Texas, just not as well known or public. And you'll see here from the Tucson.com, this is back in 2016, the Border Patrol's Tucson sector should consider closing one of its remote bases if it can't renovate it, the agency's internal watchdog said. The Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General audited 7 forward operating bases in the Rio Grande Valley, El Paso, and Tucson sectors and found that only one had security issues, safety and health concerns, and inadequate living conditions according to recently released report. However, what's interesting about this report is that the article scrubbed the names of the FOBs. So it is a known thing that there are FOBs in the United States, but again, it's a handful of them, and we don't really know too much about how they operate or what they do, other than in covering some watchdog information, how some of them are pretty bad and some of them are okay. Now, the last thing I want to finish with this, I really want you to sort of absorb what I'm saying. The FOB that is being built in Texas, it does have a legitimate purpose, but one other purpose it serves is almost kind of like a defying moment between Texas and the federal government, because the wording that the press secretary put out for Texas is that essentially the border situation is because of the Biden administration, and that by providing this FOB in Texas, it will help secure the border that the Biden administration secured. So again, this is a rather interesting way for Texas to sort of tell the U.S. government that we want to control our own borders, stay away from us, we have the right to do this because we are under an invasion. I cannot find any other moment in history where a state did this in defiance against the United States, where they quite literally just created their own military outpost, plopped it right on the border. And from here, it looks like Texas has publicly said more operations are going to spread beyond this. But this is only the beginning. I will not be surprised if Texas almost turns Texas and the Mexican border into like a FOB central, where you have a bunch of public FOBs throughout the border, or maybe turn them into COPs, combat outposts, but really use them as observation posts, if you will. But nonetheless, I really just want to make this video to show you guys what exactly is happening within Texas in 2024 and how you could expect the Texas National Guard to sort of change the direction they're taking. Not just sitting in hotels and sitting in terrible living conditions, but the state of Texas has now found purpose for their National Guard, where members will actually be performing and doing very important duties in protecting not only Texas, but the entirety of the United States. And it all starts in Eagle Pass, Texas. So we shall see what happens from here, but only within a 2-year period, we've seen massive expansions with this Lone Star mission. Starting from absolutely nothing, underprepared soldiers, undermotivated soldiers, and now creating this FOB, giving soldiers new meaning in life to what their actual duty is as a National Guard militia member and National Guard soldier.